Consumer, the Society of the Spectacle, published in First International Conference on Globalization and Consumer Protection, Kalsalingam University, Madurai, and IIPA, New Delhi. Vidisha ma'am, over to you.
Hello.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you for the nice introduction. The subject that we are going to discuss today is importance of commercial law for today's business. So before I start discussion on it, I'll try to show the PowerPoint presentation that I have prepared. Can it be shown?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Okay. Can you see the PPT?
Yes, ma'am. We can see it now.
All right. So the topic is importance of commercial laws for today's business. Now, okay. First, we'll discuss corporate laws, then we'll move to commercial laws. Now, as you know, that the commercial laws are like numerous in number, and it is just not possible to even mention every law within this limited scope of time. And corporate laws are very much related to the commercial laws because corporate laws are basically governing the corporate, and commercial laws are basically governing the relationship between two corporates, their financial transactions and their corporate transactions. So therefore, it will be appropriate if we discuss some of the laws, important laws, corporate laws and commercial laws together in this presentation so that we get a complete understanding of the subject. Now, in the corporate law, we are going to study Companies Act 2013, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, Competition Law, and some of the security market regulations, so that you get a broader idea about corporate laws. Of course, we are not going to go into depth and study everything, but an overall understanding of the subject, that is the purpose of this presentation. Next is your, first it comes your Companies Act 2013. Hello.
Yes,
Hello.
ma'am.
All right. If there is any problem, because in my last webinar, I remember there was a lot of problem, connectivity issues. So half of the things were not audible. This time, if that happens, please let me know. I'll change my internet connectivity.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So in Companies Act 2013, we know the original act was Companies Act 1956 Act, which got repealed and replaced by the Companies Act 2013. So first we need to understand what a company is. Company is a legal entity formed by a group of individuals working together towards attainment of a common objective. As you can see, I have underlined certain terms. First is your legal entity. The company gets an individual legal entity the moment it gets registered, it gets incorporated. Group of individuals who are bringing a company into existence are called promoters, and the common objective, which should be a lawful objective, the business for which the company is coming into existence. So there are certain chapters under Companies Act 2013. We'll be discussing few of those. Firstly is your incorporation. So there are few people who are called promoters. They can be natural persons, they can be artificial persons who are coming together to float a company. So they are the promoters. They are the people who are responsible for giving a life to the company. Now, I'll give you an example. I'm working in GSFC. We write promoted by Government of Gujarat. So Government of Gujarat was the one of the promoters behind, they took initiatives to bringing GSFC into existence. So they are the artificial persons, not natural persons. Secondly, the promoters, when they decide the form of business they want to give a life to, they have to choose the type of company they want to incorporate. There are broadly two types of companies, private companies and public companies. Private companies are those companies whose paid up share capital is minimum of 1 lakh. The number of members or the shareholders are 2 to 200, and the number of directors are 2 to 15. They write private limited at the end of the name. Their shares are not offered to public for subscription, and the shares are not freely transferable. These are the basic few features. And for public companies, minimum paid up share capital has to be of 5 lakhs. Number of members or shareholders has to be 7 to unlimited, and their number of directors has to be 3 to 15, And at the end of their name, they write limited, and their shares are offered to public for subscription and freely transferable. So these are the basic two forms of company. And public company can again be listed in stock exchange, may not be listed in stock exchange. Now, OPC, one person company, it's a completely new concept which has been brought into existence by this Companies Act 2013. It is a one person company. It is basically a type of private company, but given a lot of relaxations in compliance has been given to OPC because it's a new form of company. In it, the number of members is one because one person company, but directors can be more than one in number. And at the end of the name, we write OPC so that an investor can understand what is the company. So, and Section 8 company is basically type of Section 25 company, which was there under Companies Act 1956. These companies are formed towards promotion of certain specific objectives. These are not non-profit earning companies, we can say. So once the promoters decide, okay, this type of company I want to incorporate, this is the capital I have in my hand, what is my objective behind bringing the company to existence, as in the line of business? The next step will be, they will be choosing the people who will become the directors in their first board of director. So which comes into existence after the incorporation happens. Usually, the promoters of the company themselves become the first directors of the company, and they remain in position till the time the first AGM happens. Now, before you file DIR 12 to the Register of Companies, nominating this persons as your first directors of the company. They have to get the directors in identification number filing form DIR 3. So it is a unique identification number given to one individual, natural person who becomes a director of a company. And through this, that person can be identified. You can identify that person by putting his director identification number in MCA 21 website. Second is, out of these directors, one minimum has to acquire digital signature. It is, when I say digital signature, we all can refer to the Information Technology Act. It is again a digitized form of signature because after MCA 21 initiative, everything is happening in a digitized format. So you can't sign on forms and documents physically, you have to affix your signature. And that basically authenticates the information that is there on the document. Then you make an application with the suggested names that you suggest for the company. Out of those 6 suggested names, one will be allowed by ROC for you. Now that name remains in your custody, in your registered in your name for a period of 60 days, within which you have to complete all the incorporation related formalities, including drafting and preparing your memorandum of association, articles of association. These two are two basic documents. MOA is the charter of the company, which contains different types of clauses, including name clause, objective clause, etc. So the purpose behind incorporating a company is recorded in the MOA, and AOA is basically internal rules and regulations. So once the process of incorporation is over, ultimately the certificate of incorporation is granted in favor of the company, and the CIN number is allotted. As you can see, I have introduced the CIN number of GSFC here. It might look very random for many of us, but there is a meaning to it. As you can see, L stands for listed company, 5 nines stand for the business code, that is fertilizers and chemicals. GJ stands for Gujarat. 1962 stands for the year of incorporation. PLC is public limited company. 001121 is the serial number that is allotted to the company. So this is how the CIN is framed, and this is a unique number allotted to a particular company upon incorporation, and including the name of the company into the registrar of the companies by the ROC. So once the company is incorporated, it becomes an artificial person with separate legal entity, perpetual succession, very different from its promoters. The next chapter after incorporation is raising capital. So now the company has come into existence, it has to have capital to do its business. So there are 2 sources of capital. One is equity capital, that is equity shares, and debt capital, that can be any form of external loan, debentures, bonds, preference share capital, etc. So when you raise capital, you will have to pay the cost for capital. So if you raise equity shares from the market, you'll have to pay dividend to your shareholders. If you are raising debt fund from the market. So you'll have to pay fixed amount of interest. So for paying cost of capital, you'll have to ensure that your current asset is more than your current liability, so that the liquidity of company is maintained. Now you are going for public offer, you have to issue information memorandum to the potential investors. So you'll have to issue prospectus where the business line, the issue size, the issue price, everything is mentioned. Red herring prospectus is a type of prospectus only, but in it, the line of business and the purpose of seeking investment is mentioned. But the offer size, offer price, that is not mentioned, because when the price of the securities are to be decided through book building process, then we go for red herring prospectus. There are shelf prospectus and bridge prospectus, different types of prospectus available. So when you go through the act, you'll be able to understand what these prospectus are all about. Then all the securities are now to be issued in dematerialized form, especially for the listed companies, because the shares are not held in physical form anymore. There is Depositories Act 1996, which is governing dematerialization. The shares are issued in digitized fungible form, and you have to open a demat account with one of the depositories. India has 2 depositories, NSDL, CDSL. So you'll have to open a demat account with any of these depositories and do all the transactions in securities through engaging depository participant. The next slide talks about corporate governance. In the beginning of the discourse, I said there is a paradigm shift from 1956 Act to 2013 Act. And then the main point of distinguishment is the approach. Now, 2013 Act basically has an approach. It talks about corporate governance, which is self-governance, right? So this need was felt long back. In 2005, the Kumaramangala Birla Committee report first time issued corporate governance, this as a term. And since many of us who have passed out from college before 2013, we know that there was clause 49 of the listing agreement 2009, which talked about corporate governance strictly for the listed entities. Now, this corporate governance is basically protecting the interests of the shareholders, the stakeholders, by conducting the business in a transparent, accountable, honest, and fair way. And this can be ensured when the disclosure requirements are strict. When I say stakeholder, I really don't mean shareholder. Stakeholder means your shareholders, of course, and every person, natural, artificial person who are associated with the governance of the company. It can be your customer, it can be your vendor, it can be the society that you are operating in, your employees, everybody together is a stakeholder. So when you are conducting the business in a responsible way, you take care of interest of the stakeholders together. Sometimes some interests are very conflicting, but still you will have to balance it and take care of all their interests. The responsibility for corporate governance is on the board of directors of the company, on whom the responsibility related to the management and functioning of the company is entrusted by the shareholders of the company. This approach under 2013 Act, citizenship, and not only what is written, have to understand what is the spirit of this legislation. And we want ethics in business and not to operate it very, hello?
We are able to hear you. Proceed,
Okay.
Rajesh. Okay.
All right. Conducting the business in a very ethical way. Next slide. I'll just give you some of the corporate governance. When you read that, you'll be types of directors in the board of directors. Main 2 types, executive and non-executive director. Executive directors are the ones who are the employees of the organization. They receive salary. An executive director due to the functioning of the business, like the finance director. Non-executive director, they are not the employees of the company, but they take care, they bring in the knowledge, the expertise in the board, and the non-executive directors look after the functioning of the executive directors. Now, independent director is a type of non-executive director, but independent director is, though it was there under 1956 Act also, but the concept has been revised, and many new provisions have been added under 2013 Act. Now, independent director, when you read independent director under section 149 of the Companies Act, you get to learn what we mean by the word independent and what all are the responsibilities. Same way, women director, this concept has been introduced under 2013 Act. Any company with net worth of 100 CR and their turnover of 300 CR, they will have to engage one person, as in one woman, as minimum one number of women as women director in the board. This is a fantastic move towards women empowerment in the corporate sector. And then we have resident director spending minimum 182 days in the last calendar year in India. So he will be admitted as a resident director. So when you know about the types of directors, under the corporate governance norm, you get to know the size of the board, the qualification, rules, appointment, reappointment, retirement, removal, resignation, remuneration, performance evaluation. Everything related to these directors in the board of directors and board as a whole. So this is one thing you need to learn. Second is key managerial personnels. They are managing director, manager, whole-time director, CEO, CS, CFO. The 6 type of people together are known as key managerial personnel. Why they are important? Because they have greater responsibility, ultimately to protect the interest of the stakeholders. Now, every company having paid up share capital 10 CR or above, they will compulsorily have to have key managerial personnel. But if it is below that, but it is more than 5 CR, then you will compulsorily have to have a company secretary, which is a statutory post in a company. Next.
Ma'am, you're stuck. We can't hear you. Vidisha, ma'am, we can't hear you. Requesting all participants to please wait.
Hello.
Yes, ma'am, you're audible now.
I got disconnected. So I'm audible now, right?
Yes, ma'am, you are.
Okay, then I'll have to again start my presentation, as in open the presentation once again.
Yes, ma'am, you'll have to share the screen again. Yes,
All
it's
right.
visible, ma'am.
All right, fine. So we were discussing about the committees. I say there are so many committees, and then the audit function has to be conducted. Three types of meetings are there: board meeting, committee meeting, annual general meeting. In the board meeting, you'll find, as in you'll get to learn how many board meetings are to be conducted in a year, what is the form of giving notice to the directors, how the agendas are framed, how the meetings are conducted, then the minutes are prepared, and thereafter, finally, the MOM is entered into the minutes book. Same way, committee meetings also happen, 4 times a year meeting, and gap between 2 meetings, 120 days. Annual general meeting happens once in a year, and after the end of the financial year within 6 months. And again, all the provisions related to passing of ordinary resolution, special resolution, everything you'll get to read in your Companies Act. Now, reporting, preparing the annual report, including the financial statement, board report, auditor's report, everything together form part of your annual report, which is the basic document for conducting the annual general meeting. And in AGM, the dividend is declared. There is a process for disbursement of dividend among the shareholders, and ultimately how it gets transferred to Investor Education and Protection Fund. Very important concept is your corporate social responsibility. This is a concept which has been made mandatory under Section 135 of the Companies Act. It basically says when a corporate is functioning in a society, it has some role, some responsibility towards the society. So CSR is saying that every company having your net worth of 500 CR, turnover 1000 CR, and net profit 5 CR in a last financial year, they will have to form a CSR committee, and the CSR committee will have to invest 2% of the average net profit in last 3 financial years for meeting CSR obligations. So you'll read it thoroughly in under Section 135. Next is insider trading. You will know what is insider, who are insiders, and what regulations are there to control their dealing with securities. So that is what insider trading is all about. Then you get to see related party transaction. Section 188 of the Companies Act is talking about related party transaction. So in the Act, you will see who all are called related party. And I'll just give an example, like 2 parties who are related to each other, suppose holding and subsidiary companies, they are entering into a transaction. There is no problem in doing a related party transaction till the time it is doing a value addition for both the companies. But the moment that transaction becomes illegal, that point of time, this section is attracted, and related party transaction, there are basic compliance methods. There are certain committees for getting your approvals, so that everything you'll get to know under Section 188. Next concept, merger and amalgamation. You will see in law firms especially, they have this team, merger and amalgamation team, who look after the merger of business, amalgamation of business. Section 232 or 2240 that they do merger amalgamation. The 2 companies minimum transfer and transferee company, and the process through which merger and amalgamation happens. Who's the adjudicatory body approving the scheme? That is the National Company Law Tribunal. Winding up is again of 2 types. Your winding up by tribunal, which is governed by the Companies Act 2013. And then you get voluntary winding up, which was previously governed by the 1956 Act. But through this transition process, it has been transferred under IBC, that is Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, Section 721 mostly. Now, the adjudicatory body under Companies Act 2013 is NCLT, which previously was under previous Act, Company Law Board. If you have any grievance against NCLT's order, you can make an appeal to NCLAT, which is the appellate body, and from there to the Supreme Court. So this is what we learned about Companies Act, very long legislation. So in very nutshell. Then the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code 2016, very important piece of legislation. Insolvency is when I'm unable to pay my debts, I'm called insolvent. And bankrupt when I become insolvent, but I approach to the court for a declaration of bankruptcy and take help of the bankruptcy laws. So the court will basically administer my assets and pay the debts. So these are the basic fine line differences between insolvency and bankruptcy. Now, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code is applicable for the companies and limited liability partnerships only, but not the partnership firms and individuals. And the minimum default value is minimum of rupees 1 crore. It is a very interesting piece of legislation because you get to learn very new terms which were not there previously under any of the Companies Acts. Now, under IBC, you are basically not going for winding up. If there is a requirement of financial reconstruction and if a plan is available, NCLT is going to approve that plan and the company is going to revive on the basis of that plan. But if NCLT doesn't approve a reconstruction plan, in that case, you'll have to go for first liquidation and after that winding up or resolution. There are three parties who can apply to the NCLT for under IBC for reconstruction. Firstly, your financial creditor, who are always secured debtors like the banks and financial institutions. Then you come operational creditors, who are unsecured creditors like your vendor, your customer, whosoever it is. Then your corporate debtor, the company who is unable to pay its debt. It itself on its own can approach to NCLT and can request for implementing one reconstruction plan. So the procedure is a little lengthy, but in nutshell, we can say they have to make an application to the NCLT with the name of the interim resolution professional. NCLT is going to, if they approve the plan, in that case, upon admission, the CIRP process starts. There is a limited period of time within which the corporate insolvency resolution process has to be completed. Third step, the moment CIRP starts, there is a moratorium. You cannot deal with your assets. There cannot be any new litigation or a present litigation. Civil litigations essentially cannot be proceeded against. Number 4, there will have to be public announcement in newspapers, and company website shall also reflect this fact that corporate insolvency resolution process has started and who all has started, what is the claim amount, everything. Step 5, committee of creditors are to be formed by IRP and he has to invite the claims from the potential creditors. Next, the committee of creditors meeting will start. First meeting. In the first meeting, they will engage the resolution professional and they are going to remove the interim resolution professional. In his place, the resolution professional shall be appointed. The resolution professionals shall prepare the information memorandum, and thereafter the resolution plan shall be prepared by an applicant and submitted to the resolution professional, who's going to read it, approve it, and then submit to the committee of creditors. Committee of creditors, upon passing a resolution, if they approve, then it has to be submitted to NCLT for approval. If NCLT approves, then reconstruction scheme starts. If it doesn't approve, then liquidation starts. And voluntary winding up, as I said, under section 1956 Act, this provision was there. But under 2013 Act, we don't have any provision relating to voluntary winding up. So section 71 of the IBC that talks about voluntary winding up. But a company can go for voluntary winding up when it is solvent. So the solvency report has to be submitted. Such companies are not looking for reconstruction. They are looking for winding up only. So under the supervision of NCLT, the winding up process will start and get completed. Next, security market regulations. There are various acts, rules, and regulations we need to know if you are going for listing our company. SEBI Act 1992, under which SEBI came into existence. Thereafter, SCRA, Depositories Act, important go through. There are various regulations, but the most important ones are SEBI LODR, SEBI ICDR. LODR is about corporate governance, ICDR is about issuance of securities. SEBI SAST is called takeover code. When there is a hostile takeover, the compliance has to happen through SAST 2011. Now comes the Competition Act. Now, Competition Act 2002 came in place of MRTP 1969. What all are the objectives? Preventing anti-competitive practices, promoting sustaining competition in Indian market, promoting freedom of trade, protecting interest of the consumers, which is the ultimate objective. Now, we are going to learn basically 4 sections under Competition Act, which are essential for us to learn and in the business. First is section 3, which is talking about anti-competitive agreement. Section 4, abuse of dominant position, and section 5 and 6 on definition and regulation of combination. So anti-competitive agreement in simple language, two parties entering into an agreement within India or outside India, but having or likely to have an appreciable adverse effect on competition in India. So such agreement will be void. So it means that the companies can be situated outside India. They're entering into an agreement outside India, but still they're coming under the purview of CCI, Competition Commission of India. How is it possible? Because Section 32 of the Competition Act talks about extraterritorial jurisdiction. Read Section 32, you'll be able to understand how the whole system works. Example of anti-competitive agreement, collusive bidding, tie-in agreement. These are that form of anti-competitive agreement. Section 3 defines it very nicely. Go through Section 3. Section 4, abuse of dominant position. So basically, when a company achieves dominant position in the market, so achievement or of dominant position is not prohibited per se, but it is prohibited when you start abusing your dominant position. Section 4 makes this very clear. I'll give you an example. Like in my company only, we encountered such a situation. We had this agreement with GAIL India Limited long back in 1985. Since we manufacture fertilizer, we need to have natural gas as our raw material. So GAIL India Limited, that point of time, was the only supplier of natural gas in India. So they prepared the standard agreement, and whosoever wants to buy natural gas from them, they'll have to sign that agreement unconditionally. So that is how the business was happening. Back in 2014, we received a demand notice of 108 crore for not buying natural gas from GAIL for 2 consecutive years, which was shocking to us because the amount was very big. So we approached to CCI, we said it is abuse of dominant position. Because what happened, suppose out of 100 unit of natural gas, which we were supposed to purchase, we purchased only 60 units. 40 units we didn't buy, for which the demand notice came to us. But that 40 unit, GAIL sold to somebody else, not that the production that got wasted. They sold it to somebody else, but then they said that in the contract, there is a clause called take or pay clause. Either you take or you pay. And the demand notice was issued under that clause. We said this is the abuse of dominant position before the CCI. So this is an example I wanted to quote. Next is your combination, which is very much related to your merger and amalgamation concept under the Companies Act. Section 5 gives you a definition of combination, and there are regulations of combination under Section 6. So once you go through, you'll be able to understand how the entire system works. Next is your Indian Contract Act 1872. We all know contract because it happens in our daily life, implied or in expressed form. We know the essentials of the contract. I'll request all of you to study what the concepts related to guarantee, indemnity, agency, because these are very important for us to learn and implement through our learning when you are working with a corporate. Because every agreement that we are entering into will have almost a indemnity clause or an agency clause, or we take a lot of bank guarantees from parties for their performance to ensure that they perform. Or bank guarantees can be again of 2 types, advance bank guarantee or performance bank guarantee. So that is how system works. I'll request you to study the consequences of breach of contract section, which is contained under section 73, 74, and 75. Section 73 talks about consequential damages. It says then when there is a breach of contract by one party, and because of what another party gets affected, you get damages for the loss that you suffered. But consequential losses that happen out of that breach of contract, you don't get damages for that. So this is the concept of consequential damages under section 73. I'll request you to read it so that you will understand what is direct losses and you are entitled to get damages for that, what all are consequential damages. There are various types of agreements or contracts, non-disclosure agreement, employment agreement, tender agreements, your supply agreement, market agreement, etc. When you get to understand the basic concept of contract and agreement, and you know how to draft it, it becomes very easy for you to draft any sort of agreement that is sought from you. Basically, you need to understand what all are the clauses that is needed to be included in any form of agreement or a contract, and you go ahead. Now, MOU understanding undertaking term sheets. Basically, when we say MOU, there is a basic understanding among us. When we say it is an MOU, it is not binding in nature. But there is this development. There are various Supreme Court judgments when they say that MOU is a basic understanding, on the basis of which you will have to draft a contract. But when you don't draft a contract and you act on the understanding which is narrated in the MOU, then the MOU gets the same status of a contract and it becomes binding on you. So there are various precedents on it. I'll request you to learn those precedents so that in your workplace also you get to understand that not all MOUs are non-binding. Depends on your acting, depends on your functioning, it is going to be binding on you. There are certain standard legal clauses. This is an exhaustive list, not an exhaustive list, it's an inclusive list. You can add some other clauses also. These are the basic clauses which are supposed to be in a contract. Subcontracting, assignment, confidential information related to IPR, force majeure, dispute resolution and arbitration, applicable laws, indemnity. As I say that you need to basically learn the concept of indemnity and guarantee, bank guarantee or security deposit, termination, severability, amendment, representation, and warranties. What I'll do is when I circulate the slides, I have a set of standard clauses. So what I'll do is I'll circulate those clauses also amongst you, so that you get to learn how the drafting actually happens. Next is your Arbitration and Conciliation Act, very important piece of legislation, getting more and more importance day by day. Alternate dispute resolution method saves a lot of time, money, and procedural complexities. There are two types of arbitrations happening, international and domestic level. Our Arbitration and Conciliation Act governs both sort of arbitrations, international and domestic. Now, arbitration can happen through two modes, ad hoc arbitration or institutional arbitration. Like so far, we have been putting a lot of stress on ad hoc arbitration because that's the most popular form of arbitration in India. But there are institutional arbitration is also happening in India. There are 35 institutional arbitration institutions now. Important ones are ICA, DA, ICA, MICA. So basically, institutional arbitration, they follow the our law only, but the whole arrangement related to the arbitration, administration of the entire process is done by the institutional through the institution. At the international level, we know LCIA, ICC International Court of Arbitration, SIAC, Singapore International Arbitration Center, very important. In Asian countries, SIAC is a very popular institution arbitration because Singapore Arbitration Center, that is very popular arbitration center, and whenever any Asian country is going for any arbitration agreement or conducting any form of arbitration, they refer it to SICA. That saves time, cost, everything. Also at the same time, their rules are very flexible. So SIAC is very important for us to know their rules. Whenever there's a contract, so you have an arbitration agreement clause in that, or also you can separately enter into arbitration agreement in writing. Now, whenever there is a dispute, you cannot directly go to the court. You'll have to first invoke arbitration clause. And the arbitration clause, I have prepared one sample arbitration clause in the next slide. So according to that, you will have to do the alternative dispute resolution. You have to initiate the process, engage the arbitrators, and thereafter the entire process will start. We'll start with submitting statement of claim by the claimant, then statement of defense by the defendant, rejoinder by the claimants, rejoinder by the defendant, again framing of issues, cross-examination of witnesses, oral arguments, written submission of those arguments, and finally the arbitration award. Now the award has to be in writing. The award has to give all the reasonings for reaching the conclusion. It has to be signed and dated by the arbitrators. And for enforcing the award, you will have to pay stamp duty, and thereafter only enforcement shall happen. Section 29A is a very important provision under Arbitration Act, which basically fixes the timeline within which the arbitration is to be completed. Now, Section 29A says that you get a time of 12 months from the start of the arbitration process to finish off the arbitration proceedings. If you cannot finish off your arbitration proceeding within 12 months period of time, after mutual consent of both the parties, extension of 6 months is allowed. But within this 18 months frame also, if you cannot finish off your arbitration, you can get extension, for which you will have to approach to the relevant court seeking extension. Say, for instance, in Baroda, we'll have to go to the district court. Now, you will see under section 34, there is application for setting aside arbitral award, and section 36 talks about appeal from the arbitral award. These two are basic differences. There are basic differences. When you read 34 and 37, you'll be able to understand the basic differences. And enforcement of award is under section 35. There's this sample arbitration clause I have drafted, which we use in our company. For your learning, I have included it in the presentation. So basically, we are saying whenever there is a dispute, before even invoking the arbitration, you go for mutual settlement, for an amicable settlement. You refer it to your senior management of both the companies if two companies are in dispute. They themselves will sit and discuss the matter and try to resolve the matter amicably. But in case within 30 days period of time that doesn't happen, or happens but one party is not satisfied with that, he can approach to and the arbitral tribunal. He can invoke the arbitration clause, write to the other party that I'm invoking the arbitration, and thereafter the entire arbitration proceeding will start. When I read arbitration, I want you to understand there are difference between these two terms, seat and venue. Seat is basically the place. Seat of arbitration is the place. When, if there is an appeal from the arbitration order and you will have to go to a court, suppose the district court, the courts of that particular jurisdiction shall assume the power. So when I say the seat of arbitration proceedings is Vadodara, so I confer this exclusive jurisdiction to the courts of appropriate competent courts of Vadodara to take the appeal from the arbitration award. And venue is basically the place where the physical hearing of the arbitration shall take place. So that is Mumbai. Next slide. Next legislation, as in the bunch of legislations that we are going to discuss are together called IP laws. We all know about intellectual property laws. These are creation of human intellect. They are territorial rights. If the government of India is granting, then it is limited to the rights, the responsibilities, rights. Everything is related to the country. It's only not outside that. These are intangible assets because you cannot touch them. And of course, these are assets of the company. But there are two types, tangible, intangible. Fixed assets of the company are tangible, but IPs are intangible. Fixed period of protection, only trademark upon renewal, you can renew it perpetually. These are giving you exclusive rights to exploit your invention or your creation for which exclusive right has been granted to you for a particular period of time, beyond which it will pass on to the public domain. And this is an incentive for the proprietor because it works as an encouragement, recognition, and reward for the hard work they have put for creating such invention or creation. Now, IP audit is comparatively a new concept, and it is very important for corporates to conduct the IP audit because this amounts to identification of the IP assets, their registration, their renewal, their valuation, litigation, everything happens on timely basis. So IP audit again is a very long concept, but this is in nutshell what it is. IP valuation, you have to do it in constant basis because as I said, IPs are very important as the time passes by, the price of the intellectual properties or intangibles also get appreciated. So IP valuation is very important for the corporation, for a company. And inorganic reconstruction, it helps in inorganic reconstruction because if merger amalgamation or combination is happening and one company is being taken over by another company, so in that case, the company which is acquiring the other company, it has to pay some price. So if the company which is merging with another company holds good portfolio, IP portfolio, then it can seek more money from the other company. So that is how negotiations happen. Okay, first is trademark. We all know, since the time we get up in the morning till the time we go off to sleep, we get to see trademarks everywhere, either registered or not registered. It has to be a visual mark, label, signature, word, smell, numeral, whatever. It should be capable of being represented graphically, and it should be able to distinguish between the goods that is being offered from one source from that of the other. Tenure of trademark is of 10 years initially, but you can renew it from time to time, and you get a perpetual protection. Registration procedure is very simple. Make an application, get it examined, then get the FER, then you get it published, pre-grant opposition, grant, post-grant opposition. So these are the steps. Now, infringement happens very often. We are the sufferer in our company. We always go for taking actions to stop such kind of malified actions. And infringement is judged by totality of the impression, visual, phonetic confusion. And they basically infringes try to confuse the unwary purchasers of average intelligence and imperfect recollection. And if they say that there has not been any infringement, then they have to prove it. If there are dissimilarities you are claiming, then you will have to show that the dissimilarities are clear and striking to the naked eyes. You go for public notice. If you see that your company's trademark is being infringed, you try to educate your consumers so that they don't get deceived, and cease and desist notice to the party who are infringing. If they don't stop infringing thereafter also, you take civil and criminal option for getting remedies. Civil remedies are more preferred by us usually because it has this injunction provision, which is missing in case of criminal remedies. Next is your copyright. We know the basic concept of copyright. It is basically the expression of idea through which you are trying to protect and not the idea itself. Registration process almost similar to that of your trademark, and it is not compulsory registration. But usually the lawyers always insist that you get it registered because it's a prima facie evidence of your right. Because once you register, your right is being entered into the register of copyrights. So that's the benefit. There's this infringement, of course, happening. There is a process of handling that infringement. Then patent, basically on innovation, on your invention. Essentials are there, should not be non-patentable, as mentioned under section 3 and 4. There has to be novelty, inventive step, industrial application, and the maximum right of protection is 20 years. You cannot extend beyond that. And every year you'll have to renew your patent right within the span of 20 years. Two types of patent, product and process. Patent infringement is comparatively lesser number of instances you will face as compared to trademark infringement. And registration of patent process is also more or less the same. Of course, there are technical differences. And lastly, infringement of patent. Infringement of patent is basically, I'll tell you, for this, more than the lawyers, the technical teams of the company, just the R&D team who are coming up with an invention, their help is very much needed because if you are to distinguish between two inventions, you need to understand the technicalities, for which more than the lawyers, the technical teams can be of more use. So therefore, their involvement and their contribution is very much needed. And other IP rights, industrial designs and geographical indications, there are many other IP rights available. So these are the corporate laws and commercial laws I wanted to discuss. Apart from this, also there are labor laws, taxation laws, everything come within the ambit of your commercial laws, which needs more time to deliberate on, and more understanding is needed on this subject. So that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm sure the participants would now have a brief idea about the different acts like Companies Act, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, the Competition Act, etc. We'd like to take up any questions, if there are any. Okay, so moving forward, thank you so much, Vidisha ma'am, for such an enlightening session. Looking into the importance of commercial law, I would now like to invite Dr. Sujata Patil ma'am to tell our participants about the newly launched post-graduation diploma course in business and commercial law. Sujata ma'am. Sujata ma'am.
Bhumika, are you able to hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Well, I hope Vidisha, she's done with the session. Fine. I hope the whatever the information that has been put forth by our today's speaker, Vidisha Roy, she made it very crystal clear how the different component, I mean the different various laws that are going to play it's a significant role. With this, I hope most of the participant, I think now they were able to gauge, they can understand the importance. Considering this factor, we at Navratna University, we have come up with a new program in this line. That is what we are going to offer this year. PG diploma, that is postgraduate diploma in commercial business and corporate law. If you look at the title of our program, PGD BCL, I mean Business and Corporate Law, it's a combination of the two component, business and the corporate. At the initial stage itself, as I mentioned, corporate specifically deals with the overall activities of a company. But our focus is not just focusing on a company. There are various business activities that we are going to notice: startup, MSME. Okay, from see when a person enter into a business, he'll start from initial stage from the scratch, okay, as a sole trader or a sole business. Then gradually, if the business keep expanding, he'll just step into the partnership business. Then again, if he's doing good in the business, then the partnership business may convert into a private business. From private business, it may convert into a public business. This is how people is going to grow and expand their business activities. And in this scenario, you need to understand all the various laws right now. Vidisha has shared, our speaker, how the different laws like IPR, Contract Act, competition, corporate governance. In addition to that, there are various other laws also going to play a very significant role. I think recently we are all aware that there is one important law which has come in regulating the interest of the creditor and the debtor, that what we call it as a insolvency and the bankruptcy law. That also plays a very significant role in this area of the business. That is also one of the part of our program, and it falls under the purview of the commercial law. And at the same time, there is a couple of other acts due to the time constraint where Vidisha could not touch up. Even the labor law is also very important component you need to understand, and that is going to be studied under the program that is called labor law, which deals with the regulating the relationship of employer and employee. And this is very much essential from the employee point of view and also from the employer. I hope you all aware gratuity, PF, provident fund, and if there is a kind of the industrial dispute between the employer and the employee, how the Industrial Dispute Act is going to beneficial. These are all the components in this journey you are going to, in this program, we are going to focus. In addition to that, even see, our business is not just constrained to the domestic level. We are into an international. And here also there is, under the program, we are going to touch up with a concept called FTP, Foreign Trade Policy, which also deals with the FDI, Foreign Direct Investment. Taxation law, in addition to this foreign trade policy, which regulates the international trade and the business, even taxation law is also one of the important components. See, all these areas of law need to be understood in order to run your business in a very successful manner. And IPR right now, Vidisha shared. See, just mere registration of your business, entering into the business world is not going to serve the purpose. Once you enter into a business, you need to understand how to protect your intellectual property, how to protect your goodwill, how to protect your brand in the business, because you are in a competitive world. That you are going to understand with the IPR, that is your registration of your trademark, registration of your product or services under the patent, registration of your ideas, creative work under the copyright. If that the product, if you are manufactured or it is a naturally grown product in your area, since from the long time, you have a right to register under the GI, geographical indication. This is how All these various laws you need to understand in a systematic way. Then and then only you can take up your business in a successful way. And as I said, startups. See, when we discuss only the corporate or the company law or regulations, SEBI regulations also, I think Miss Vidisha has touched up. Even that plays a very, very, you need to understand, being an employee, you are not only paid with the salary or other benefits. Even there is an kind of a benefits provided to an employee, that is called employee stock option. Under the share capital, you are going to understand what do you mean by employee stock option. You are going to be a part of the company. Okay, not only an employee, you are going to be a part of the company, and you are going to put forth your efforts for the success of the business. In turn, you are going to share that profit. So all these components you are going to study under the different areas of law. And considering all these factors only, we have come up with this unique program, the new program, that is what we call it as the postgraduate diploma in business and the corporate law. I hope this program is going to help a lot for the startup, for the entrepreneurs, for the people who are working in the corporate world, and also the students of law, management, or any discipline. If they are graduated, they can take up this, because this is a general course. Everyone should aware about all these component in a day-to-day their life, or in day-to-day their business. I hope this program, new program, is going to be helpful a lot for you people. And anyone is interested to opt for this, we will share all the details with you. And also you can visit our website and you can apply for the same. Any questions pertaining to this today's webinar, pertaining to the commercial law? So that's the reason behind today we are having this commercial law. First, you should understand what is the important commercial law. Then and then only it will helpful for you people to take a right decision. If there is any questions, please you can. Chandrika, Bhumika,
Yes, ma'am.
is there any questions?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, Chandrika, we can proceed further.
Yes, ma'am. Bhumika?
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Truly, law plays an important role in every citizen's life and must be known by all. I would now like to invite Ms. Chandrika, ma'am, to propose the vote of thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. I, Chandrika Tevatia Raj, on behalf of School of Business and Law, Navrashna University, consider my privilege to have been asked to propose a vote of thanks for this webinar. We have been fortunate enough to have Ms. Vidisha Sen Gupta, who has been connected to our university, and to thank you so much, ma'am, for accepting our invitation and gracing this occasion with your enlightening words. We are also thankful to Dr. Hitesh Bhatia, Associate Dean for School of Business and Law, for his inspiring mentorship. Thank you to our principal, Dr. Sujata Patil ma'am, who has helped us and supported us at every obstacle. I would also like to propose my vote of thanks towards Dinesh sir for the technical and logistic support that he has extended towards this webinar. I would also like to thank my colleagues, Ms. Madhura Thomre, Ms. Stella Joyce, and Mr. Naveen Sinha for always being motivating and for always being there. I would also like to thank our students who had actually invited and called a lot of companies, especially Bhumika, Darsh, Shreya, Krupa, and Trupti and Prarna. Thank you so much to all of you. I thank you so much, Bhumika, for anchoring this particular session. And last and not the least, I would like to thank the participants. Thank you so much to all the participants with whom the webinar could not have happened. We hope to have fruitful deliberations during any future events that we have. Once again, I would want to state that we are all most grateful to everyone at the webinar. We thank you for being with us this afternoon. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, one and all. Hope to see you in our future events.
Okay. Thank you, one and all. Thank you, Vidisha. Thanks to all the participants. Okay. We can leave now.
Yes, ma'am.